He got back to work with more fervor than he had been experiencing lately. Perhaps Khakis was looking for distraction from the rarity about him. That didn't last long, however. The issue is not wanting to get too wet, to become drenched, saturated in one's imagination, by a task, by a place, by a set of people, to not become colonized by what's around you. One can even come to feel literal chest spasms if one is particularly sensitive to that sort of thing, as if one were being warned away from a drowning well. Psychology attests to metaphor. Khakis had developed a habit of frequently breathing in deeply to remind himself he wasn't submerged, he wasn't literally drowning. Hours are carefully cut up into manageable intervals, and some portion of the personality, its more radioactive part, which in types like Khakis is also the most concealed, that it might not radiate excessively and cause a veritable hazard, there's no small risk of that, becomes a thief inside of one. It robs time away from the affairs of more practical surface elements of the person. One has to make a real choice between the secret alter ego of an artist, a seeker, a hierarch at midnight, and a more thorough, genuine independence. Eccentric, perhaps, and hopefully not too dismal or vulgar in the eyes of others, but in any case, independent. Working at an office 9 hours pegged to a computer 5 days per 7 is liable to become simply untenable. The inner man hits against that cage and proclaims his intention to conquer more than just midnight. Those hours you steal from sleep, to write, to think, to feel something. Those won't do. I want all of it. The night will conquer day and avail it of secret, intimate light, of the presence of that other sun whose rays are lightning. Or it may not. In Khakis' case, it was certainly trying. There are concessions one might make to that black-clad bandit inside, to that shadow inside. But some are more satisfied than others with concessions. Soon after starting work, Khakis had begun fasting the morning and skipping lunch. It meant time alone in the office without having to justify scribbling the kind of fluid orthography an experienced supervisor would spot for non-work related. The pain of hunger, a meager burden to be sure, was something as well. A slight offering to the inside, to the intimate, to the phantom face whose smile is love of space, of distance from the world, and who wants to steal one away from that world and its concerns. With this point of difference, with this new degree of separation between myself and others, will you be satisfied? Will fasting be enough? It was as if to ask that question that Khakis had begun his little ritual, but the high priest in the entrails of his soul was a greater shepherd than takes one of its sheep in return for letting 99 run foul. And they are my sheep, it seemed to remind him. All of them, from reason to lust, your whole being will be sunk into the profundity, into the intimate, into the truth. And speaking of truth, she walked by. He knew of her the softness and familiarity that breaks guilty consciences, a veritable type of religious repentance. For what specific sin, it didn't matter, for the sin of not living fully and fully free. It broke upon him when she furrowed a brow in inward pain and came pleading to the threshold of speech, eyes wide and full of impossible meaning, and then retreated, and he with her, into a damage and a silence, a torture of love-making, a love to come, he was assured. Assured by what? By who? Not by her, surely, not by himself. But certainty met and girded him whenever anything suggested the subject of her. He knew her, somehow. Now she was just a co-worker, occasionally rustling by his desk. But soon she'd be more. This tortured quietude, this spurn of the vague and the vacuous, For it is better to stay the hand and tongue a century long than to betray the poetry of longing. This is the chamber whence our bond will issue. This. Khakis had got 3 phrases from her when he wrote that one. 3 phrases and 1,000 moments. Such is the softness that relaxes men's gaze when they fall upon creatures for whom instinct decrees affection. But that doesn't provide an exhaustive formula. There is, in any case, an element very much different from instinct. If what is meant by this word is a jolt of blood, a jerk of the muscle, it's not enough. In her was a vast airy cavern, a deep and deepening hall of water, cooled progression that seemed to souse the surfaces of life, instinct included. Late one Friday, something clerical brought him to her workstation, though what it was he forgot in its uttering. What's wrong? I forgot why I walked over. Oh dear, don't worry. The weekend's an hour and 10 minutes away. You haven't been getting enough sleep, huh? He nodded. It was at least part of why he'd forgotten his menial affair in her presence, but he couldn't confess the larger reason to her, not yet. Green sickness, they call it. They do. You've been talking to the natives. No one's really native, though, right? She looked at him with the air of a dilemma. It was the tension of conspirators who've yet to confess each other. Then again, he wasn't quite a conspirator. He didn't know enough. I know someone you can talk to for that. It isn't a priest, is it? Her eyes became somewhat opaque. Yeah, why? It's just, I already saw one of those. One of the communications girls recommended it. I don't remember her name. She gave me his parish address. Oh, not that kind of priest. This was a strange response, as strange as any he'd gotten here. But he was getting used to these. Why don't we go together? The next hour, or 70 minutes, were long but happy ones. He grabbed his things in a haste and caught her as she was doing the same. Both were early. They took a bus in the opposite direction to town. Khakis hadn't been this way before. It was forest and uphill. She looked out the window as they rode. Green and gold light painting her face intermittent with the dense aura of darkness that mature forests nurse in their thicket, like a treasure. The priest was a moderately long walk from the bus stop when they got off. It was an isolated cottage where he lived, traditional, but for an apparently Art Deco frame just below the roofing, and a few other ornaments. In any case, it was solid, robust rock and wood. The strikingly two-tone sort of hut that might have been traditional around here. Not much color beyond dark mossy green and a matching shade of pink. They knocked.